In the past couple of weeks, you may have noticed a number of artists boycotting German clubs and festivals. Scratcher DVA, Kampire, Raji Rags and others have all pulled out of important gigs in Berlin, including at Berghain, the world's most famous club. There have been a lot of confusing news stories referencing strikes, cancellations, and clauses being implemented and retracted.
Und antidiskriminierenden Umgangs eingesetzt werden.
So, what actually happened? Berlin has historically been one of the few cities in the world that treats electronic music as an art form. Because of this, many Berlin clubs, festivals, and even DJs receive government funding, totaling hundreds of millions of euros every year. Germany is also home to one of the largest populations of Palestinians outside the Middle East, with up to 30,000 living in Berlin alone. Many recipients of government cultural funding are politically outspoken, including in support of Palestinians, or book international artists who are actively pro-Palestine. So, why is this deemed to be a problem? The German authorities have banned many pro-Palestinian demonstrations in recent years, saying the crackdown is to stop public disorder and prevent public anti-Semitism. But how the country defines what is or isn't anti-Semitic is the subject of fierce debate. In 2017, Germany's federal government adopted what is known as the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, a definition that sparks very mixed reactions.
Why the definition is so controversial is the problem of how the definition is applied. People implement it because they think it would be just a simple answer to address a complex problem, like how to prevent the spread of Israel-related antisemitism. You cannot address such a complex problem with just throwing out a definition, then we're set.
Some observers believe the IHRA definition is a critical tool in combating anti-Semitism, which is on the rise globally. Critics say that some of the IHRA's examples of anti-Semitism are being used to prevent criticism of the State of Israel and to unfairly silence pro-Palestinian voices. In January, the Berlin Senate introduced a new clause to its application process for cultural funding, requiring all recipients to agree to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. In a letter of protest, Berlin artists and cultural workers said they feared the clause would effectively force them to cancel events and disinvite speakers who were critical of Israel, for fear of losing funding. This scenario had already played out in the case of Oyoun, a state-funded cultural centre for diasporic, migrant and international art. In November, Oyoun hosted a morning event and vigil in response to the October 7th attacks and the rising death toll in Gaza. It was held by Jewish Voice for Just Peace in the Middle East. The authorities in Berlin pressured Oyoun to cancel the event for being politically charged, but it went ahead regardless. The result? The venue's €1 million in annual funding was revoked.
I think the accusation is very telling. It's a non-Jewish German governmental body, the City Council of Berlin, telling a Jewish group, which consists mostly of Israelis, by the way, or former Israelis who live now in Berlin, that they are anti-Semites for having a critical or very critical point of view when it comes to the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Following the formalisation of the IHRA definition into cultural funding, there was a wave of protests. Strike Germany, an emerging coalition of workers in Berlin's cultural sector, called on international artists to turn down invitations to speak and perform at German cultural institutions. The movement gained traction, gathering thousands of signatures, and also resulted in several artists from the UK, Uganda and Kenya pulling out of the popular experimental art and music festival CTM.
A dance floor is a place that brings people together. If you're then going to say, well, we'll only give you money for this dance floor to exist if you only let the people in who think like us, that's the problem.
In an unexpected twist, the new clause was suddenly retracted last week by the Berlin Senate, which said it took the decision partly in response to the legal and critical voices that saw the introduced clause as a restriction on artistic freedom.
There is uncertainty about the legality of this clause. For now, the clause is not going into effect.
So what exactly happens now? If the clause has been retracted, what does it mean for the earlier decision to revoke Oyoun's funding?
What about Oyoun?
And will cultural workers continue to strike? Strike Germany says the retraction of the clause is only a temporary victory, and encourages artists to continue to strike against what they call Germany's wider crackdown on pro-Palestinian solidarity and artistic freedom.